Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be here. My name is Jane. I am an independent data visualization designer from Toronto. And oops, let me make this bigger. There we go. And today we're talking about Tekken. So Tekken is a game that's been around for a long time. It's a Japanese fighting game. And for those of you who never heard of this game or never had any experience playing fighting games, I'll try my best to explain everything, but you might not follow along. Even if you've played Tekken before, you might not follow along because I'm talking about things that'd be very technical, but I'll do my best to explain things. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into it. You can learn more about me on my website on janezhang.ca. So I'm just going to go into the project. So earlier this year, there was a release of a game called Final Fantasy VII. It was a demo and it was a remake. I remember watching it just sort of, by random, right? Just watching it by accident. And I was looking at the fighting mechanics and I wondered to myself very briefly, could I visualize fighting game mechanics? And this to me sounded a little bit crazy, but I was really trying to push it. So I kind of just did research on and off on my own time. And there are these two resources that I found very, very helpful. So this one was by, both of them are YouTube videos. This one looks at combat system, and this one looks at why button mashing doesn't work. And this one actually talks a little bit about Tekken. So these are really great resources to learn more about fighting games or games in general. And so I decided to focus on Tekken. And Tekken is a player versus player game. And I have zero experience playing the game. I know about the game. I've played other fighting games, but I had very little experience playing this game. And so I did a lot of research, so much research. I watched a lot of videos. I looked at a lot of forums and websites, but tournaments was by far the most helpful for me to understand the game, in that the commentators would narrate what's going on. And from perspective of an amateur, you sort of understand what's going on. It's actually very complicated when they explain things, but for me to have someone to explain it while it's happening is very helpful. And so I also engaged with the Tekken subreddit community. So I wanted to embed this into my process, and this is a new thing I was doing. And so I started off by asking for some suggestions and ideas. And I'm a nobody in this community, right? But people still responded. So this is a very active community, right? Lots of people are joining, lots of people are talking. And so when I asked for ideas, I was surprised to get some sort of a response. The first sort of, I guess, positive feedback was it seemed like there's going to be an interest in this. So this is actually pulled from a comment, right? And the second comment I got was from the moderator. So the moderator was really nice. They suggested on something I could visualize. So they talked about effective range. So effective range looks at how close you have to be for an attack to hit. And they're just exploring ideas. So a lot of people just giving me ideas, and I had a lot to work with. But with little experience, someone recommended I look at a specific character. Her name is Josie Rizal. So she is a relatively new character in the Tekken franchise. She's very beginner friendly and she's very fun to play. So I thought, okay, you know what? I'm just going to start looking at this game through this character. And so with the scope of this project, there's a lot of things I could do. So I had to figure out what to quantify, what do I want to visualize? And through my research, I came across this table. This is a huge data table that a lot of volunteers collect, and it looks at frame data. And so there's actually a lot of errors in this table, in this data. I found some errors myself, but we'll just use it for the purpose of this project. So every character, so there's about 30 characters. Every single character has about 100 moves. It's a ridiculous table, right? And each move, so each line represents one move, one fighting move. And all of these are attributes that define that move. So you can imagine there's a lot to work with, right? And I'm just going to sort of briefly explain this. So first we have command, which is really important to understand how to read. Tekken notation is so complicated. It took me a long time to figure out how to read this with no experience. So within the game, you have an input of buttons to execute an action, right? So first in Tekken, you have direction. So you have a stick, right? You can move forward for F, back for B, up is jump, and D is down or crouch. And then you can attack with the limbs, right? So left punch is 1, 2, 3, 4, right punch, left kick, right kick. And so if I wanted to execute this move, which is a D/F down forward plus 1 and 2, it will look like this. So this is actually me doing it. So I move it down and I press 1 and 2 together. So that's command input. Simple, right? Startup frame animation is a little bit harder to explain, but I'll do my best. So Every single move has a startup animation. And this is a clip I pulled from this video. So anything that's a light attack is considered fast. And see how it has 14 frames in this animation. This one is a heavy attack. It has more frames in the animation. It's slower. It's powerful, leaves you vulnerable. So you kind of have to assess which one to use based on situation, right? So this is why startup frame animation is important to know. So these two are really important, I would say, to explain briefly. So in terms of how this data gets expressed within the community, it's usually in text format. So I'm just going to pull two examples of how the data gets expressed. So first, we have it in a Reddit forum, right? So here, it just lists a couple of top moves for this character. And what they've done is they've only listed these attributes, but it's just in text format, and that's it. Same thing in this video, it's an explainer video, and it just lists these attributes, but also, once again, it's just in text format. So text format for listing data is very limiting. I think there's a lot of opportunities to visualize it graphically, because if you say want to compare, right, here's a list of moves. So each of this that's highlighted is one fighting move. If you want to compare these moves and sort of understand how they, are relative to each other, it's very hard to do that just in text format. And I think this is the essence of a data visualization is to enable comparison, like in a very simple way. I think if you think about a bar chart, what's a bar chart with one bar? It's kind of useless, right? If you have a series of bars, you're more likely to understand what's going on in context. If you have just one bar, just put a number, right? There's no point. And so I decided to test the ideas out. So what I have, I'm going to show you all the versions, but this is just an overview. So this was version 1. This is version 2, and this is version 3. So every version got, it was changed through the community's feedback. And so to start off this project, I had a very general goal, and this is the goal I had in mind when I was starting off. So my main goal was to create a reference to help people build combos and tactics by visualizing the frame data. Players can better assess risks and rewards of certain moves. Very, very general. And so I started off with a list of moves I found online. So I decided to visualize a small subset to test out my ideas. And so this is what I came up with for version 1. And version 1 is very chunky. This is letter size, is huge. And this is just built in Illustrator. So this is just a legend, ridiculous, right? But hey, you gotta start somewhere. And I visualized 5 moves here. And so I took this and I asked the community what they thought, and I got eaten alive. They tore me apart. So here is the first critical feedback. And they said, there is no need to visualize any of this. One can just look it up, right? Why create a confusing graphic to tell me all this? And I think this is such an important point that I tend to forget about, and I think in general people forget, is that lay people don't need complicated things to tell them something if they can reference a table for it. But in my opinion, if it's something that can give them a lot of value and something that will help them learn something really quickly, it's worthwhile for them to learn how to read it. So I had to figure out a way to add more value to what I was creating than just something that was ripping off of a table. This was a technical feedback. So this person clearly had no design background, but they were really trying to convey to me something technical. So they said, it was hard to make comparisons, which was interesting. They brought that up. And then they said another thing was, they kept looking at the number, but not looking at the visualization. So if a rule of thumb for them was they rather look at the number than try to count or look at the visualization, then maybe it's sort of defeated. And I'll explain what that means here. So here, it's sort of hard to say compare this bar. I'm not going to explain what visualization means. I'm just going to talk about the components. So this length, it's kind of hard to kind of compare. And even these attributes are not really easy to compare across. And I'll also mention here, so here's this 14 boxes, but are you going to count 14 boxes when there's number 14 here? Probably not, right? And so the final feedback, so this is from the moderator. You might have seen this earlier on when they gave that a suggestion of visualization. Moderator pops up a couple of times. Their feedback was the most constructive. I could tell they had experience giving feedback in general. And so this was also the most helpful. So they said, beginners usually do not need to create their own combos. They're going to use sample combos from in-game, which makes sense. They're more likely to benefit from a set of moves to use along with a game plan to follow. Okay, I think this is also fair. They think it's more interesting if I could create a new way to teach players something about Tekken. And finally, I should consider asking specific questions to gain a better understanding of how players generally use the sort of data. So this is a very solid response, right? And basically they're saying the questions I was asking were all not, not really great. I should be more specific. So I felt horrible when I shared this online and I got torn apart. I really felt I missed the mark, right? And I took a couple days just to have a break because it's actually very overwhelming to be bombarded with so many feedback. I've only showed you three pieces of feedback, but there's a lot more. And so I really had two choices. I could either quit or I can keep going. I decided to keep going. And so I started off with trying to redefine my goal. So the problem with my goal was, first of all, I was making too many assumptions about my target audience because they don't really need to build combos. Maybe tactics is more useful to focus on. And players was very, very vague term. So how do I make it more specific? And so I actually went on the beginner mega thread, which was in the subreddit. And here, actually, a lot of people post their questions. And it's great because this is where I can solve problems. And without knowing, I sort of just wrote one question per sticky. I grabbed a sticky notepad and I just wrote down one comment per sticky note. And then I started seeing a theme and I started to organize all of these questions into these themes. And this is a quick summary. So in general, I noticed people ask questions that were very, very vague or very, very specific. If you're asking very vague questions, it means you kind of just started out. You just need some guidance on how to start. But if you're asking more specific ones, it means you sort of spent some time with the game already and you just need some help with technical support, right? And so I decided to focus on character-specific tactics. So how would you effectively play a character, or how do you counter certain characters, certain opponents as a character? For those who don't know, when you start teching or any fighting game, you should start off with one character because it takes a long time to learn a character, and people generally specialize. Even professionals, they usually specialize in a character. And so I thought this was a good way for me to start. So start on character-specific tactics. I got very lucky. I found this video. This video talks a lot about tactics and game plan. And this is actually a very hard video to find. There's not a lot of people who talk about this kind of content. So what they've done here is they've done a sort of a video on Josie, which is who I'm focusing on. And what's kind of really helpful is they've actually categorized every single move. So this is one move, and this is a category this move belongs to. What they've done is they contextualize that move. And I think that was really helpful for me. And so from version 1, I got something like version 2, which just looks like this. And the biggest change from version 1 to 2 is this part here, where I've labeled this move. So this move, collectively looking at all of this data, you would know it's good for punish standing, punish with a range. I'm not explaining what that means. It's just a situation that you can apply this move to. Another change I made a lot of changes, but I'm just summarizing some of the changes I made. This one was based on that feedback I got, right? So this is why it's helpful to have feedback. Here, remember how this 15 boxes, you're not going to count that. I decided to remove the number and just like sort of make it into 5s. So 5, 10, 15. I think that's easier to count, right? Easier to work with. And so I took version 2 and I asked the community again, but not everyone. I decided to invite and message the moderator because they were really good at giving me feedback. And so this was the feedback they gave me. They felt the problem I identified was relevant and thoughtful. They see the utility of using cards. So I initially was using a letter size sheet, but I changed to cards. And the reason for cards is to allow better comparison. And they were able to see how it could function in a way where you can approach different characters. So the way it currently is you compare cards for each character, but I kind of imagined ahead and said, I can also imagine using these cards for one character versus another character to see any similar moves, right? And I thought that was interesting. I didn't think of that. They already thought of this application. They thought the most useful aspect of it was labeling the moves. So when I mentioned at the bottom, right, giving the data context, I think this is really important because when you try to make data more meaningful, it makes more sense to people, right? And so version 2 was great. So version 3 was just aesthetic change. So here I pulled this concept art from the Tekken Facebook page, and the inspiration for this character, so she's Filipino. The inspiration was from the Filipino flag. So these are the colors, the blue, red, yellow, and white. And then this flower. So this is the jasmine. The Filipino flower is the national flower. So you'll see the designs here. It's actually inspired from this flower. And so this is kind of what influenced the cards. It was important to me that these cards felt like it belonged to this character. So you wouldn't assume this is like some other character's cards. And so this is the final product. I printed these out, but I didn't make a lot of cards. I just kind of made a small subset. So I'm going to actually show you how you can apply these cards if you're learning the game. So I'm going to talk about this set of cards. This is her, one card is per move, right? One card is per move, and these are the attributes that define this card. These 4 are specific to Josie. Switch dance. This is called switch dance. So switch dance 1, 2, 3, 4. These are only used by her. The first thing I can do is I could rank these. I could rank these by startup frame animation. So these petals show how quick a move is. The fewer the frames, the faster it is, right? The more the frames, the slower it is. So currently, it's actually ranked by startup frame animation, number of frames in the animation. It's interesting because the slowest one was contextualized to be a wall combo ender. So it's a combo ender, right? You wouldn't open with a slow move. That's a very stupid idea. You should open with a fast move. That way you can get the punches in and you can connect to create combos, right? The second thing I can do is I can categorize it by range. So here on the top right corner, it shows range, so effective range. So this is range 1, this is range 2. So this is good for close combat. This is good for a little bit farther. And range is the best way to explain range is range 0 is when you have 0 character between you and your opponent. Range 1 is you can fit 1 character between your opponent. Range 2, you can fit 2. That's kind of the idea behind range and how it gets measured. This is the most interesting part I'm going to talk about. It's called mix-up. It's a tactic within fighting games. I may be specific to technique. I don't know. Switch dance 2 and 3, they're good for mix-up, and I'm going to explain what that means. So this is switch dance 3. This is switch dance 2. And if you look at it carefully, the beginning of the attack, they're both a kick, and then they look very similar, right? And this ends with a kick. This one ends with a punch. So when you consider mix-up, the idea is to confuse your opponent on what move you might use. You do not want your moves to be predictable, because the moment you're predictable, your opponent's going to block you appropriately, and you're just going to miss everything, right? So what's interesting about these 2 moves is that they hit differently. So this one lands. So what I'm about to say, you might not understand, but don't worry about it. Just think about how I'm processing this. So switch dance 3 is a low hit. To block a low hit, you have to do a crouch block. Switch dance 2 is a mid hit. It'll hit your torso area. To block that, you have to stand and block. If you stand and block a low kick, you're going to get hit. If you crouch block a mid hit, you're going to get hit. You have to block correctly. If you just look at these 2 cards comparing, the damage is 17, the damage is 10, so they're very similar. Range is similar. The only thing here is the frames. So frame on block is -6. Frame on hit is +5. This is actually a relatively safe move to do. This one is more risky. I'm going to have more of a frame disadvantage. On block is -12. On hit is -1. So knowing that, what I'm going to do is I would play this card, which is a little bit more safe, more often. I'm going to play this move more often. And sometimes I will play this one just to sort of slip it in there, because I'm not going to be able to predict what I'm going to do. What's good about this card is on counter hit, it'll do a launch. When you do a launch, your opponent gets thrown into the air, and you can do a lot of combos in the air. So this is how I'm using the card. Just think about how I'm processing the information. So these are all the cards. And this was like a really tough project to approach, but it was very meaningful for me to be able to use it in a way that people can compare things, right? If you imagine like on your table, you can move this around. Because if, say, for instance, if I just try to tell you everything I told you through a table, it'd be very challenging. I think I can do it, but it'd be very hard to kind of have you keep up with everything. And, each character has 100 moves, and you're probably not going to look at all of them. But if you look at 20, that's really overwhelming, right? And ultimately, my goal was to focus on how to teach people how to think about the game, not just how to play. I think how to think is more important than knowing the technical things. Understanding tactics, understanding, the game plan, higher level understanding of it, I think is really important. And this was by far my favorite feedback or comment by the moderator. They said they've never seen anyone with my skill take an interest in Tekken. And so the idea behind this project was I came into a community that's never used data visualization for their content or their domain, and I was able to give value to them. I thought that was the most exciting part. And so this was really moving for me to hear from moderator, from a stranger. I don't know who this person is, right? Overall, this is a really fun project to do. If you would like to learn more, you can check out my website at jingzing.ca. Thank you.